Check, check.
Okay, there will be people filtering in. I want to start promptly at 1 p.m. We have a lot of information to cover. For those of you who are joining us in person, welcome. It's a pleasure for me to be here, as well as a pleasure to have you in the room. With that said, we also have people on Wisconsin Eye who are attending this seminar as well. So I thought this would be an outstanding idea, simply because for quite a few years now, I've heard misinformation and disinformation about the electoral process. And as you all know, my history, I was a county clerk for 12 years. I then served in the state assembly for 10, and now I am in the state Senate. And so I thought it would be extraordinarily important to go through the electoral process from the time that the nominees are get their nominations in, their names are certified, and from that moment when they are to be placed on the ballot to the moment where we finish up the election and certify the results. And so we're going to try to do all that in a couple of hours. So be patient. There's a couple things that I want. The ground rules is if you have a question about some specific thing that is being discussed, feel free to ask that question. We would be happy to answer as we go along. If something dawns on you that has nothing to do with what's being discussed, but you may want to ask later, because we may get to that at a later time. And at the end, if your questions hadn't been answered, we'll certainly entertain them right at the end. So feel free to ask questions. Everyone up here is ready, willing, and able to answer your questions. Any kind of grandstanding type statements are not a part of the process, and I will be extraordinarily offended and probably take some sort of action if we have any grandstanding. So with that said, I would like to introduce to you today the folks that are going to help us understand the electoral process. And I don't even claim to know it all because it's been a while since I've been involved in elections. We have Kelly Michaels from the city of Brookfield. Sorry, Lisa Tull, Wisconsin Election Commission staff, Megan Wolf, Richard Rydecki, Robert Keogh. Did I pronounce it correctly? Keogh. Thank you. ES&S Election Systems and Software, Kyle Weber and Chris Washington. Oh, jeepers. I know I was going to mess that up for sure. Welcome. Thank you all for giving your time and efforts and your knowledge to this process. And I am going to now send everything over to Lisa, and she will take it from here. Thank you.
So Kathy already went through, Senator Bernier already went through all of our different presenters. Our mission today is give you a better understanding of our election process in Wisconsin. And we're going to divide that up into 3 different sections. The first section is pre-election, all the work that we do to get us ready for election day. Then we're going to go into election day, starting at the beginning of the day and running through the election night. And then we're going to do post-election. In the midst there, we're also going to have some demonstrations on the equipment. It should be interesting. I do poll worker training. It takes 3 hours. So getting this through in 2 hours is going to be interesting. So the first place that it starts is to let you know that our elections are not done by one person. It's a coordinated effort throughout the entire state. It starts with our municipalities, so our towns, our villages, and our cities, our counties, our state, and our election providers. We all work together to make elections happen. It doesn't end up in a little room in the back door, in a back room making this happen. It is all checked and balanced back and forth between all of those to make sure our elections are fair and transparent. And some of the work that's done at the municipal level is actually done at the county level. Some of our providers, we provide services for our municipalities that can't do some of the detailed work, especially those smaller municipalities that have part-time clerks. So take that into mind. When Kelly is talking, she's doing a lot of work. And some of that work we do at the county for our smaller municipalities also. So we're going to start with our pre-election section. So at the state level, they're the ones that develop the templates that are they're approved by the Election Commission. They certify the candidates for the state level offices and for the federal offices that are going to those ballots. Those certifications come down to the county. They provide training and guidance, either through in-person or through a lot of webinars, which anyone can access throughout the state. They support the counties and the municipalities with information, guidance. They guard our voter registration systems. They do voting equipment certifications. So any equipment that a municipality purchases has to be certified. They take care of that for us at the state level. And they're a huge source of information for everyone, voters, the media, all of our clerks, poll workers, everyone. At the county level, we are also taking in certification information for the county levels candidates. We are also getting information from all the municipal candidates that are going to be on our ballots, those certified by their municipalities. And we're getting the candidates that are certified by the school districts. We combine all of that information to develop our ballots, following the templates that come from the Election Commission. Now, at my county, I'm actually the ballot programmer, and I program all the ballots to make sure everything is accurate. Some of the counties actually use vendors or election providers, like some of the ones that are here today, to do that for them. They follow pretty much the same process that I do. I develop the programming. I will make sure all the candidates are on. I make sure everything is working correctly. I send proofs of those ballots out to all of my municipal clerks with all the certifications so that they can verify everything is accurate. They send back, need to correct this. We make those corrections. We continue on with making sure those ballots are getting printed and out to our municipalities. We do a lot of training at our county levels. Even at the municipal levels, they're doing training. I will do a huge number of baseline chief inspector trainings to make sure everyone understands the process of our checks and balance throughout our system. We support our municipalities by making sure that they have the supplies that they need to run their election, whether it is training, more ballots, anything that they need. We are their backup to help them get election day through. We publish notices and we do huge amount of system testing. Now, when it comes to testing, this is a picture of my test deck for the April election in 2020. There's over 4,000 ballots there. We do a huge system test on everything before we even send any of our media or data to our municipalities to make sure everything is working correctly. When the municipalities get their media, they do another test. They do a public test that is published so everyone can be there to make sure it's also working correctly there. There are checks and balances throughout that entire system to make sure this is working. So we're going to switch over to what the municipalities, the cities, villages, and towns do pre-election.
Okay. So with the test deck, we actually do a separate test deck than what the county does because we don't want to use their information just as an extra layer of security in the municipalities. So we create our own test deck with, my test deck had like nearly 400 ballots. So when we're doing that security test, we also know what that system should result. And we're making sure that it does do that before we will use any of the machines. So just on that. As far as absentee voting goes, we publish notices to the public so they know when absentee is available to them and what processes they need to follow to obtain an absentee ballot. When we receive a request, we make sure that that request is acceptable. In other words, they've provided photo ID unless they're exempt. And then we determine how they want to receive that ballot and we send it out. We also conduct person absentee voting in the few weeks leading up to election day. And so we have those folks coming in. They also must provide photo ID before a ballot is issued to them. Once we get the absentee ballot back, we review the envelopes for any insufficiencies in the certification. And if time permits and we have contact information, we reach out to the voters to let them know that there's a problem with their certification. If there's plenty of time, and we don't have contact information, we will return the ballot to them with a letter saying you have a problem with your certification. Once we do that, we log, sort, and secure our absentee ballots so that they're safe leading up to election day. At the same time, we're doing polling place preparations. Many municipalities have one polling place. Larger communities such as the city of Brookfield has 7 polling places. So we're making sure all of those polling places are secure, they're accessible by the public, and that there isn't any problems with election day plans. We do, once the test of the ballots are done, we're making election notices again to the public as to when election day opens, which is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. We schedule and train all who are going to be working on election day. And we schedule and train more as some call in sick or tell us for some reason they can't make it. So that's a continual process right up to and including election day. We're printing poll books and absentee logs, making sure our supplies for the polls are not only accurate, but that they're where they need to be on election day. And then we're setting up the polls and securing our election systems so that we know that our elections are secure. And by securing, we use seals to seal the information that's tamper evident. On our sealed documentation record or our inspector's statement, we log that number, that seal, so that on election morning, the inspectors, the election inspectors check that seal number to make sure it has not been tampered with. If there were a tampering event, that equipment would not, it would be replaced.
Great, thanks. One of the points that we were hoping to make on this slide, and this really relates to a coordinated effort between the local jurisdictions in the state. So poll books and making sure that poll books have accurate information, that's happening every day, every hour in the state of Wisconsin. And we do that through a process called registration list alerts. So on a regular basis, we receive information from the Department of Corrections, from Vital Records, and from other organizations, state entities that provide data, which we then are able to put into the statewide voter registration database and flag it for our municipal clerks. Wisconsin state statute requires that only a municipal clerk can make changes to a voter record, so inactivate a voter record, but they do that using information that's provided from our state and sometimes federal partners to make those determinations. And by utilizing the statewide system to get that information, to send it to our clerks, we're able to actually track to make sure that all of that data is being addressed before Election Day. So that makes sure that there aren't deceased people on the poll books, that if somebody is now adjudicated incompetent or has now been determined to be a felon, has been convicted of a felony, that they will not be an active voter on the poll book on Election Day. So voter list maintenance, the things that happen before an election, that's something that's happening every single day in the state of Wisconsin to make sure that our poll books are accurate.
Ready for questions?
Well, we have one. The next thing we're going to cover just real quickly is the statewide voter registration database. And this is something that's required by federal law as well as by state law. And what this is a system that really helps our local election officials to administer elections end to end. So a quick fact about Wisconsin, we have the most decentralized election administration system in the country. And so what that means is in most other states, they might have 15 to 100 county clerks running elections. Here in the state of Wisconsin, we have 1,850 cities, towns, and villages that administer elections in addition to our 72 counties. So that means we have 2,000 users of our statewide database. And those local election officials, again, they're the custodians of their voters' information. So when it comes to voter registration, when it comes to determining local contest and who's going to be on a ballot, when it comes to sending out absentee ballots and checking them back in when they come back, that is all happening at the municipal level, but they're all required to track that in the statewide system. So we're responsible at the state level building that system. We actually build it ourselves here in the state of Wisconsin. A lot of other states use a vendor, but we've built it here ourselves. And we're in charge of securing that system as well. And despite the fact that we have more than 2,000 users of our system, we have some incredible security features built in to that system. Because again, it's the clerk's data, it's the voters' data, but we're securing that database. We were one of the first states to implement multi-factor authentication into our statewide database. We also have endpoint protection incorporated as part of our database. And what that does is make sure that only a secure approved device is able to have access to our system. We also require all of our users to take security training before they'll even get a username and password, a clerk. They have to go through our security training before they're able to do that. And at the end of the day, we know every single move that's made in the statewide database, and we're able to make sure that only authorized activity can take place. And on a regular basis, we're doing assessments of that system, both looking to see if there are any vulnerabilities, as well as to look to see if any unauthorized activity has taken place. And we would be able to recognize that, determine it, isolate it, and take action if ever was needed to do on that system. So it's a very robust system. And it really is what helps to administer elections here in the state of Wisconsin end to end. Another important point is that all of the data in the statewide system by law is available on badgervoters.wi.gov. Now, our law does require that that data be charged for if it's not a public record that's already something that's been created. But all of the data points from the statewide voter registration database are available to the public to purchase, to analyze. And every year, hundreds, if not thousands, of political parties, organizations, candidates buy that data and do their own analysis and audits on a regular basis.
Am I ready?
And then finally, if you're a voter, this is another important thing that we do at the state, and that is all that data that I just talked about that your local clerk is entering. So your voter registration, your absentee ballot, and tracking that. This is the voter portal where a voter can go and access that data. So this is data that's coming directly from your local election official, and you can find that on myvote.wi.gov. This is where you can go to view your sample ballot, find your polling place, take a look at your voter history, find your voter registration status, make sure it's up to date. You can track your absentee ballot. All of those things that your clerk has entered into the statewide database is available here through the MyVote public portal. But I think an important point is this is data coming directly from each of those 1,850 local jurisdictions. And I think that's it.
Thank you. We obviously didn't rehearse, folks. So this is where we take questions, and I want to be the first to ask a couple questions on the details. So we talked about the test deck. Well, the test deck, would you go into detail? What is a blank ballot, fully voted ballot, how many ballots, and how do you work that test deck to determine that the memory stick and the machine is actually counting what it's supposed to count?
So I guess I'll go. For the municipal test deck, what we do is we take our ballots. So for each ward, we will come up with a numbering sequence such as like 221. So 2 votes for each candidate, and then 1 for an overvote or a write-in. So we come up with that formula, and then in each ward that has a ballot, we will create the test deck. So we know how it should total up. Then we feed it into the machine, and obviously if it's a blank ballot, you get a warning. You can either override it or just know that it's run a blank ballot. If it's an overvote, it also warns you and tells you that you can't take the ballot, or you can just accept it and none of your votes will count. So we are well aware that we overvoted, but we are looking for the warning that the voters would experience. And so once we do that run, we run the reports and make sure that the machine counted exactly as we anticipated it to do in the test deck.
And Kelly, just real quick, those are all public meetings too, right? So anybody can come watch that.
Yeah, it's open to the public, and it's noticed as well.
So the public test is, but there's a pre-lat test, right?
Right.
So
we do the pre-lat test in advance of the public test because we want to make sure that our programming is accurate. So we do a pre-test. Once we do the pre-test, we make sure that everything is working correctly. We don't need to order a new stick. And then we schedule the public test. A lot of times in my municipality, we invite our inspectors, our chief inspectors to come in because it also gives them an opportunity to refresh their experiences with the equipment prior to election day. And I think it's helpful for them.
Okay, so if there's an error on the ballots or there's an error in the programming on the stick, that test will indicate that and you'll know there's something wrong and you will address it.
On the pre-lat, yep. And then we would get back to the county and say, we have an issue with the stick, or maybe the stick, failed for some reason. Then we would get that corrected prior to the public test.
Perfect. One of the questions I have also for the municipal clerk is how do you determine or how do you accomplish trying to get bipartisan poll workers in your polling place?
Yes, so we get lists from both parties that we make appointment, and then I do a shuffling method because I have 7 polling places, and invariably I'll have too many party workers at this polling place and not enough here. So what I try to do is get a good balance of party workers at all of my sites. So once I've done the shuffling to make sure I have coverage, then I look at the jobs, and if I have enough scheduled, I will try to pair a Republican with a Democrat in key positions such as at the poll book, or if it's central count at the remake table. And then of course you never pair 2 of the same kind together. So if one party doesn't have enough, then you would just pair a party worker with an unaffiliated. But I always try to look at my key positions where I would want to have that balance.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes, sir.
I was listening here and I was listening to Megan Wolf. I mean, I don't know if it's Mrs. or Mrs., but you took full responsibility for the voter rolls, from security to programming and everything else. Is there any outside independent auditing done on Wisconsin voter rolls? That's my first question. Then I just have a brief follow-up.
On the voter rolls?
Yes, ma'am.
So absolutely. Well, the clerks on a daily basis, any member of the public is free to buy that information and to audit that information as well. So I guess to answer your question, yes, that's happening all the time, every day. There's regularly academic studies, there's local officials, legislators, the Legislative Audit Bureau is able to look at that data and do any type of analysis that they would like.
But you don't employ anybody to have an independent audit of those roles. You're doing this internally yourself, your organization, or what?
So the statutes are very specific on who is able to conduct list maintenance, and that's the local election official. So each of our clerks, they're in charge of taking a look at data available to them, be it through vital records or whomever, and they make those determinations. And then the public, again, is free to buy that data and to make any other analysis of that.
So in short, the answer is no, you don't employ a third party to oversee the voter rolls. Follow-up question to that is, has anybody done any research into the voter rolls for people that had the same home phone number for maybe 25,000 times?
I'm sure there has. Again, hundreds, if not thousands of groups, parties, individuals have purchased that data and certainly done a number of different types of analyses on that.
Are anybody removed from the voter rolls, or are they just made inactive?
So the statutes actually are very specific about this. So there's 2 statuses in the statewide database, active and inactive. Active means that you're on the poll book and you're eligible to receive a ballot. Inactive is more or less a historical record of your voter record, right? Just because you're no longer eligible doesn't mean that you don't still have a record of being a Wisconsin voter participating in an election. So we're required by law to maintain inactive records.
So in theory, you could say that 25,000, 90,000 people that were inactive for as long as 12 years could be activated and obtain absentee ballots?
No, sir, that's not correct.
It's impossible.
You have to re-register to vote, and that It has to happen at the municipal level. So only a municipal clerk can register a voter and change the status of a voter. So you have to become
That's all I needed at
pre-registered.
this time.
I can probably give you a good reason why it's better to have an inactive versus wiping them off. Let's say someone does try to register as a deceased person. I'm going to see that deactivated record and I'm going to see that that person is deceased. And it really helps the local clerk determine that this voter is not, it needs a second look versus if they weren't there at all, I would not have access to that information. So for the job that I do, making sure our list is accurate, I'd rather see it at inactive so I can know, wait a second, there's an issue here.
Good. Any other questions on pre-election? Seeing none, take it away. Whoever.
So we're going on to election day now, and we're actually going to start with the state.
Well, great. On election day, our job at the state is really to support both voters and our clerks. So we basically set up a call center so that voters that might have questions, clerks that might have questions are able to call us with those questions. Another thing that we do is, of course, get my vote ready for election day. We see huge spikes of traffic on election day to myvote.wi.gov. And so making sure that that site is ready to go, that we've worked with all of our clerk partners to make sure that the data is accurate, that people can find their polling place, they can track their ballot, that they have the information that they need, is really one of our core functions. But certainly our local election officials and poll workers are the star of that day and the folks that are doing the most work on that day.
So at the county level, election day is really the work that's being done is at the municipal polling locations on election day. We tend to be the biggest source of information. That My Vote website, we have that, everyone in my office has that up. We tend to get lots of calls, my polling location, how do I get there? We direct them to their, My Vote gives them directions how to get to their polling location. It's an awesome resource. We so much use that every day when we have elections and every day in our office. And we're support for our municipalities. Sometimes they may have underestimated how many ballots they need. I can get them more ballots that day. If they lose poll workers and they need extras, I know where I can pull them from and get them the poll workers they need. I get them the support they need to get their jobs done on election day. And that's my main job during the day on election day at the county level.
So at the municipal level, the election day starts out very early because my phone starts ringing with, poll workers who are maybe calling in sick. That can be as early as 5 a.m. So we appreciate our partners at the county if they have additional people, but we also rely on, our own staff to go to a polling place and cover for us until we can get a replacement worker there. The start of election day really starts before the polls open because our poll workers are arriving and there's security checks, remember, on that seal number on the equipment. They're going to get there and they're going to make sure that they have everything they need to start election day. The poll list, they're going to make sure there's been no tampering overnight and that they're ready to go. They're going to start up their equipment and they're going to get what's called a zero report. Okay, so that tabulation equipment, the first thing they're going to do is check to make sure that everything is set at zero so that there's no zero. Very important. They're going to get the area set up for registration. They're going to get the area set up for issuing ballots, which is your poll books, and they're going to get their processing of absentee ballots set up. Some municipalities do their processing of absentee ballots right at their polling place, and others do it at what's called a central count location. With security and documentation, there's a document called the inspector's statement, So when they verify those security seals, they're verifying it first thing in the morning and then at the end of the day before they close out to make sure that not only was there no tampering before they got there, but there was no tampering by voters during the day. So those security seal checks are recorded on what's called an inspector's statement form. We talked about running of the zeros report and securing their ballots and equipments and records during the day. That's really what the inspectors, the poll workers are there to do, is to make sure everything is going the way they're trained. As an example of the inspector's statement, you can see that attached to the inspector's statement is an incident log. We ask the poll workers to note any incidents that are out of the ordinary that occur on election day, so that in the activities after election day, you can note, perhaps the equipment jammed, or perhaps there was, a power interruption, or, all of those things that aren't typical are noted on the inspector's statement, as well as the time and then the initials. It's very helpful for clerks and both on the county and the city level to see what happened, since we're not there. Election day registrations. On election day, the registrations are allowed to occur as long as the voter has acceptable proof of residence. Acceptable proof of residence is only those documents that are permitted by the laws that you folks had passed. So if they come in with a document that is not on that list, they're not eligible to register and they are not eligible to vote. Okay. A lot of people think that provisional ballots are used if they don't have the right registration proof. But it's not true. Provisionals are only used if I am already registered and I go to the poll book and I don't have my proof, my photo ID, my acceptable photo ID. And in that case, the voter is not allowed to feed their ballot into an envelope, and they have until the Friday after the election to give their acceptable photo ID, or their ballot is not counted. So on this form, if they have a Wisconsin driver's license or a state ID, they are required to give it. Election inspectors also have an ineligible voter list that they check before this voter is allowed to continue with their registration and vote. This is an example of a documentation that we provide to poll workers. One about proof of residency, and the other one talks about proof of identification. Just to be clear, when you register to vote, you must prove where you live. That's proof of residency. When you vote, you must prove you are with acceptable photo ID. So it's a two-step process. You must complete both steps in order to register on election day and vote. Those who are registered already must still show photo ID on election day. When you approach the poll book, whether you are a new registrant or whether you are already registered, you are required to state your name and address aloud, required to show photo ID, and you're required to sign the poll book. A poll worker is looking at their photo ID. They're looking to make sure that that picture reasonably resembles the person standing in front of them. Okay. The name doesn't have to be identical, but it has to be similar, right? Could be that you're registered under Bob, but your name on your photo ID is Robert, right? Can't be you're registered under Robert and your name on your photo ID is George, right? So they're looking at the name. They're making sure the photo matches, but the address does not need to match, right? So your address, as you know, when you notify the DMV, they don't give you a new driver's license. So that does not need to match as long as the address that you gave matches what's in the poll book, okay? It doesn't have to be one of those real IDs with the little star on it. We get that question a lot. So no, it doesn't have to be a real ID. But it must meet the expiration date guidelines. And in the statutes, depending on the photo ID that you're using, there are deadlines that go with it. For example, your driver's license can be not expired past 2 years or the last general election. So again, I talked about no ID, you get a provisional ballot. That's if you are already registered. Okay. This is an example of what we provide to our poll workers, because no one's an expert on what all of these different photo IDs look like. So I think it is very helpful for our poll workers to see a picture of something they may be given at the polls. I'm going to tell you that the two that are used, probably 95% is Wisconsin driver's license or a US passport. Some of these other IDs, we never see them, but those two are your number 1, 2 used. This is an example of what the poll book looks like. So these are folks who are already registered. You'll have their name and address along with what ward they're in. And then you'll have a signature box with their name on to the right. The column to the left of that is where a voter gets numbered sequentially. I want to point your attention to those little notes that are underneath the voter's signature box. You'll see for Paula, it says, have you? That would be a voter who is in the ERIC listing that hasn't some sort of information out there that we check if she's moved. So that would tell the poll worker, if Paula shows up, that would be the question to her, right? Have you moved? And then Paula would say, well, no, I haven't. And then see to the left where it says notes, the poll worker would then indicate that she was asked and she has not moved. Right underneath it to see that, right in the box is a watermark that says absentee returned. We love that watermark there because that's where the voter's gonna sign. So it's very apparent that that person already voted. We have an absentee for them. They should not vote again. And so the poll worker would say, my note says here that you've returned an absentee. And then the voter would say, well, yes, I did. And the poll worker would say, well, you're not eligible to vote. You've already voted. Processing of absentee ballots. The process is the same whether it's done at the polls or at a central count location, with this part stating the voter's name and address out loud. Obviously, the voter's not there, so that is done by the election inspectors who are working with absentee ballots. So they state the name and address out loud, and then they review the certification area of the envelope, which is you can see on the screen, the highlighted marks are. So that review, that criteria review, really the inspectors are looking to see, has the ballot envelope been opened and resealed, or is it opened, right? Because that could be evidence of tampering. So they want to make sure the ballot envelope is sealed properly. They want to make sure that the voter's signature appears on that line underneath the certification of the voter. And then below, they want to make sure the witness signature is there, as well as the witness's address. The other thing they want to make sure is that the voter hasn't deceased in between the time that the ballot was cast and election day, or that there's a duplicate. So what happens with duplicates sometimes is, we'll send a ballot out to a voter and they will vote it. And then they think we haven't received it, so they'll ask us to send it again. And they'll vote it again, another one, and we'll get both of them back in before election day. We know that because we get the ballot in, we enter it into this vote. So we know that a ballot's already been received. So if it's a duplicate, it's marked by the clerk that has a duplicate. On election day, if all of those things are good and the poll worker decides they're going to accept this ballot, they're going to record the voter's number on the poll list, on that envelope, and then on the back of the ballot if it's central count. Okay, so it's a little bit different for central count for at the polls. The other thing that they're going to do is they're going to open it up and pull the ballot out. When they pull that ballot out, they're making sure that the ballot that's inside is the correct ward, right? We want to be perfect, but sometimes the wrong ward gets sent out and they will catch that it's the wrong ward, and then they will send it to be remade. The other thing that they're looking for is that there are no tears or cuts or problems with the ballot, like somebody spilled coffee, sent it in, right? Because the machine is going to reject that. So they're going to make sure that the ballot doesn't have a problem that's going to cause it to be unreadable. All of those things, if they are, it's going to be remade. Okay. Remake process takes 2 election inspectors, preferably one from each party, to remake the ballot, right? Because one's not going to let the other cheat. And we keep the original ballot. We number it with a remake number, with putting that same remake number on the remade ballot, so that in any after audit or recount processes, you could actually take those 2 ballots and match them and make sure that they were completed correctly.
So we're going to talk a little bit about observers. Give Kelly a break from talking all the time. So election observers, there's things that they must do and things they cannot do. And observers must check in with the chief inspector, and that's where they need to direct their questions. They need to show an ID. They're going to sign an observer log. They must wear a tag that says they're an observer, and they need to follow the rules at a glance. And it's a little pamphlet that I give to all of my clerks to make sure that they have available to hand out to their observers. Any questions they have on election day, they need to direct those to the chief inspector. And then they need to follow the 3 to 8 foot rule. And that rule is that they are allowed within 3 to 8 feet of where someone registers to vote or where someone is stating their name and address at the poll books. And they're there to help keep our elections transparent, observing what's happening. There are some things that observers can't do. So we don't want them to take or make voice phone calls. You've been in the polling locations, you know how they are. We need to keep some of that silence. They cannot engage a voter unless it's requested. And that's very rare, but sometimes a voter can ask for assistance in marking their ballot, and that would be one reason it would be requested. They cannot wear campaign items, and they cannot engage in electioneering. They cannot view any confidential information. I think that covers it. I had one more thought and I forgot it. Sorry.
Okay, so then we get to election night. It's 8 o'clock. The polls are closed. Anyone who's still in line at 8 o'clock gets to vote. So the chief inspectors first make sure that there isn't other ballots that need to be fed in. They make sure that absentees are in. They make sure that no one's registering and still eligible to vote. So once that's done, and make sure that everyone's good, has voted, then they close the polls. And that's done on the equipment. Before they close the polls, though, remember what I said earlier, they check the seals. Okay, so they're going to check the seals, then close the polls. And they're going to run what's called a finals report or a finals tape. And that would be the accumulation of all the votes that were fed in during the day. So the way that equipment works is it's not keeping a count. It actually, when you close the polls, then it looks at everything and tabulates. So then once they do that, they would transmit the unofficial totals to the county. So before they finish their work of securing, they want to get those totals going to the county as quickly as possible, because there's candidates that are waiting for the information. They're on the edge of their seat, as well as media. So we want to make sure we can get it to them as quickly as possible. So the verification of successful receipt of totals by the county clerk is important. Many communities modem their totals from their polls. So we want to make sure those telephone lines were open and they got the totals before the night wears on. The provisional ballots, if there are any, the municipal clerk enters that into the WIS vote system so that everyone knows, hey, we've got some provisional ballots out there that may be entered in the Friday if the person brings in their photo ID. So what the poll workers do at that point is they start looking at their totals tape to see how many ballots were running for each board, and they're to go to the poll book to see how many tickets were issued or how many numbers were issued for voters, right? Because we want to balance number of ballots to number of voters. Hopefully we balance and there are no issues. If there are reconciliation issues, they're usually because of a numbering error. And the poll workers then are taught how to grid their books to see if they missed a number or if they duplicated a number. So there's a grid process where they basically just, each page, I have this number, I have this number, I have this number. They keep crossing it out until they balance. They also, once they've reconciled their poll books or their ballot logs, they're going to secure those records along with the ballots by putting them into tamper evident ballot bags. They're going to secure the media stick from their equipment into also a tamper evident bag, and all of their absentee envelopes, which, right, an absentee envelope contains the voter's signature. So that's like a poll book, right? So you have that signature. So all of those records are secured, and they're noting on their seal documentation record what the seal numbers are so that they can transport those to City Hall and have a record of a secure transport. Those same records then are transported to the county clerk the next day by 4 p.m. And that seal documentation record then is available to the county clerk to make sure that transportation has no issues with the seal documentation. All of these systems are open to the public, and there's no secrecy or anything like that. It's, all this is talked aloud so that those folks who are present to observe not only on election day, but during election night can hear what's going on, see what's going on in a very open and transparent process. As mentioned, a lot of communities are provided poll workers who have an affiliation. And so those affiliated poll workers are certainly, part of that process as well. Then after the election night, we have what's called the Municipal Board of Canvass. So in Wisconsin, we have large communities with lots of wards, and we have small communities with, maybe a single ward or a combined ward. So In those one polling place locations, the election inspectors then convene as a municipal board of canvass, usually right on election night, to do their canvass work. In a larger community such as mine, there's actually a municipal board of canvass that consists of myself and 2 other qualified electors. And in my case, I have one elector from each party. So mine are party affiliated. And so for that process, we convene then after election day. And we're looking at the documentation that comes in from the polls to make sure everything is in order. And then we sign the canvass statement. Also then should and do reconvene if there are provisional ballots. That's right. So if a voter goes to vote and they are registered and they don't have the proper photo ID, remember I said they put their ballot in an envelope, it doesn't go in the machine. They have until 4 p.m. on Friday following election day to bring their proper photo ID to the municipal clerk. So if they do that, then that provisional ballot is removed from its ballot bag and hand tallied and added to the results. If they do not appear, then it's just rejected and it's not counted and they've wasted their time.
So on election night, state statute requires the municipal clerks to transmit or send the results to the county within 2 hours of they finishing their tabulation. They are unofficial. We have 2 hours to get all of that documentation up onto our websites. So there's 72 counties that are putting that documentation out. There's not one single place where it's sitting. So all of the news outlets and all of the different places are grabbing that off of our websites. We have all of our municipal clerks call in to verify we have received the results and their totals to verify we have everything. We're also having them give us their provisional ballot information to make sure we can keep track of that when we are doing our board of canvass later. So on our website, we have results that are coming in through polling locations, and we have in our county, we have 2 central count locations. So at central count, all the absentees are done at a separate location than the polling places. So they're coming in multiple times for different wards. This is a picture of our website. This is actually from November of last year. We have created a checkbox on our website to give you an idea of all the different ballots coming in. So what happens on election night? It's usually the smallest municipalities that can shut down the fastest and transmit in. And those are the first ones that come in. In the large municipalities that have central counts, the polling locations are the first ones that transmit in. Our system, anytime we get any ballots in, it looks like everything's in. It's not. So we created a checkbox to show all of those municipalities that have multiple machines transmitting in data to us. So some of these are central count, and some of them, like the city of Edgerton has 2 machines. They'll run all of their absentees in one machine and all of their in-person in another. The system brings those in and totals them together. And in the public test, we test that to make sure that's working correctly. So the difference in the central count locations is those machines do not transmit. And those, last November, we had 60% of our ballots in our county were absentee. So the majority of those were coming in later than the votes of the in-person voters. They are transmitted to us. They have to bring them to us. They do not transmit. And those, because of the high volume, they take a long time to finish those, and they're the last ones in. So for example, City of Janesville used a high-speed scanner to tabulate all of their results for their election in November. So my last load from them had over 22,000 ballots. And this is the last load for that night. We had another machine from our City of Beloit Central Count uses tabulators that do transmit. They used 5 of them that night to do all of their absentees. Their last one was in our last load, and a couple of municipalities. I do have a few municipalities that can transmit. They call in those results and we hand enter those to put those in. So, but those results on election night are unofficial. We do not certify our elections off of the unofficial results. They are required to be put up there on our websites by state statute. The other thing that we do is some of our counties don't have websites, but they're required to post their number of provisionals on their website. So we do a combination for our county to make sure that it's available for everyone. This is an example of what we had for November and for April. We do not have a lot of provisionals. If you can see that April had a whole 0 for this last year. In November, we had a total of 18. So on election night,
Sure. So on election night at the state level, so I think Lisa and Kelly did a great job of explaining all that goes into making unofficial election night results official. And this process takes almost a month, and it ends with the state canvassing and certifying the results. So after the municipalities go through and they check everything, they make sure that they have the right number of ballots that were issued as signatures on the poll book, as absentee ballots that were issued. The county does the same. Then it comes to the state, and we take a look at those data points to make sure that everything makes sense. And then once we are able to certify that the results are correct, then the chair of the commission signs the certification. And this happens for any state level contest. So statewide offices for legislators, that is the process for certifying those results. So again, it has to go through 3 levels of certification of public canvas before those results are unofficial. So I think it's important to note that on election night, those results you see on the ticker on the news, those are coming from media streamers, right? Those are not official results on that evening. And so it's to be expected that all of that hard work that happens at the municipal, the county, and the state level to check things, there can be minor variations in those final totals because again, those election night results are official. And what you see on the news, that's not coming from any official aggregated source. There actually is not an official place where you can go to find aggregated results on election night here in the state of Wisconsin. They come from each of our 1,850 municipalities, and it takes almost a month for those canvasses to happen. Again, in public, canvasses to happen before those results are official.
so we have a time for questions on the election day process.
So a question was asked to me at a meeting I was at, and I thought I had a good answer. So you can tell me if I do or not. What keeps me from making copies of ballots and standing at the machine and feeding them in? And my response was, number 1, nobody would have to be looking. Number 2, the numbers would not match what's on the machine versus what's in the poll book, which they check periodically. At the end of the day, those ballots, and I won't even get into the timing marks and all that. Okay. But those ballots, all of them have the clerk's initials or 2 poll workers' initials. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if you had funny ballots that you fed in, you immediately find them because they don't have those initials. Is that correct?
Right, it would be done during the balancing process, right? So if somebody were to do that, no one's looking, which is, we have so many people at the poll looking at it would be hard. But if something were to happen, we would be off, right? We would have one more ballot than we have voter or whatever number was fed in. We would be going through all of those ballots and looking for exactly what you were talking about, a ballot that is not properly initialed by either the clerk or the 2 poll workers who issued that ballot on election day. And those would be, go through what's called a drawdown process that's provided for in the statutes, and they would be tossed, not counted, not tossed like in the garbage, but the votes would be tossed.
Just wanted to verify my knowledge base was still with you.
You're right.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions here in regard to election day activity? Oh, back here. Well, we'll start here and work our way back. Okay, David?
My question is, when you say you would toss it, what does that really mean? I mean, do you go back into the machine and back it out, or, you know,
It's
exactly what
manually,
would you do?
yeah, it's manually noted that the votes on those invalid ballots would be subtracted off the totals. So like Lisa was explaining, the unofficial totals are not official. There are canvas processes that adjust those totals, you know, to reflect an accurate count that happened. That would be one of the processes. That drawdown process would be well documented, as well as the actual ballots would be retained. And so you would know exactly which votes were being tossed from the count.
Thank you. Question back here?
I have two questions, actually. The first is, you talked about the proof of residency and the checkbox that's on the form that it can be checked that they provided correct proof of residency. Is there anywhere that that's maintained, what that was? Or is it just up to the person taking the registration to say, yep, that's right, check?
No, so what they do is they indicate on there not only what type of document was provided, but who was the issuing agency of that document, and then the last 4 digits of whatever number is associated. That actually, when we enter that into the statewide database, we indicate all of that information.
So what if someone doesn't do that correctly?
There's a box on the entry that says incomplete registration, and we mark that, and what it does is it deactivates that voter and they have to re-register.
So I guess I'll rephrase that. What if the person taking the registration is falsifying that?
They should be fired immediately.
How?
Well, I would imagine that someone's going to be me. I mean, there's lots of observers. I would hope that the many observers that are at our polling place would catch that and make sure.
Hope. Okay.
File a complaint either with the state or with myself. Any funny business like that, that poll is not suited to work polls.
Okay. And I guess you referenced the 2-party balance a couple of times, you know, as far as having when they remake ballots, that kind of thing. That's not required, right? So that's a decision you make at the municipal level to do that and create that in your area?
Statutes indicate that whenever possible, in jobs that require more than one poll worker, such as the poll list, which there's a original and a duplicate original, I believe the statutes say that whenever possible, you pair the party affiliated workers. Part of the problem is, you know, there's not enough.
Okay.
So,
and then finally, is there a uniform training statewide that's provided to every poll worker in every job that they're doing it the same way, no matter where they are in the state?
there is training, and maybe Meg, you can.
Sure. So Kelly can certainly talk about how she trains poll workers, but the statutes, this is not a policy decision. The statutes give that authority to each municipal clerk. So each municipal clerk gets to build their poll worker training and figure out how to train their poll workers. That being said, we do have a curriculum created that the clerks can utilize, especially last year when we had to train poll workers at the last minute. I know a lot of clerks utilized our training that was available virtually that they could show folks, but each clerk is allowed to prescribe their own poll worker training.
And I will say there's a standard registration form. So it's not like we're all using different registration forms that would have. Imagine that municipal clerks would, I mean, the form is the form. It's asking for the same information. So when we were training poll workers on, you know, what I call auditing the form, right? The voter fills it out, the poll worker is auditing the information that was provided. Right? The poll worker shouldn't be filling the form out for the voter. But they're auditing the form. So, I mean, I don't know that you could have a real wide difference in training.
And chief inspectors, so each polling place has a chief inspector that's in charge of the polling place. they are required by state law to receive state training and certification. So the chief inspector does have to go through the statutorily required training through the state.
And there is also an election day manual that's provided to each polling place. So if for some reason, someone needs the step-by-step recipe to follow, there is a state manual.
Okay, next.
Megan Wolf, maybe you can address this. On the new training video for the Badger books, it only requires one individual now, not two. That's correct?
That was actually statutory. So the statute that allows for electronic poll books, it says right in there that when you're using electronic poll books, only one is required. So that's not a policy decision, that's statutory.
So some of the protections that we have in the past using this new technology could create an opportunity, since you only have one individual looking at that poll. That's not okay. I guess I'm going to ask that. My other question is this: on election day, I'm really grateful for the clerks and everybody and Senator having a conversation today. On election day, you showed the different forms of ID. If I came in with a fake driver's license, none of the clerks would have the ability to tell the difference between a real one or a fake one.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could if it's a real good.
Because the DMV checks aren't done until 30 to 45 days after on election day, correct?
Well, the DMV checks are done upon registration. So if you're already on the poll book, I'm assuming you're talking about election day registration.
I'm saying that would be the same day registration. You wouldn't be in the system. You would come in if you came with a driver's license. That counts as your proof of residency. And that would also count as your ID. If it was fake, you'd be able to make, I'm saying we have not given clerks or staff the ability to make that differential, correct?
Correct. It would be found after election day, something that would be noted as a voting irregularity that would be forwarded to the district attorney for investigation, possible charging. But correct, I don't know that, any poll worker is an expert on detecting fakes.
No. And then I think also in the state of Wisconsin in the 2020 election, the actual temporary driver's licenses were nothing more than a piece of paper for 45 days. I know I had a lot of chief inspectors. It's a piece of paper. There was nothing else other than a piece that could have been manufactured. I did have chief inspectors that had concerns about it. We did have 6,500 voters in the state of Wisconsin in the 2020 election that unfortunately don't know who they were. Thank you.
So, like many things, I think that there is some trust involved and there's checks and balances in place. And the fear, hopefully, of getting caught doing voter fraud and the prosecution of it is also a deterrent. So many of our laws are set up to deter as well as provide the checks and balances up front. Senator.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Thank you for doing this, and thank you to the clerks. You have a tough job. Two questions. One is, when you have recounts, do you look at the ballot and make sure that the name is accurate and the person's on the voter list, or do you just count the ballots? Is there verification of a ballot being?
Are you talking about
legal?
an absentee, the ballot
No, I mean
envelope?
the ballots during a recount.
Well, the ballots are secret ballots, so no single ballot would tie a single voter unless it were an absentee coming through central count, which it would have their voter number on the back. But when you go to the polls and you vote, there's nothing that ties your ballot to you. Does that make sense?
Yes, but some of us are concerned that our recounts are numbered. They're just recounts. They're not checking the ballots as being valid.
See if I'm following you. So what you're saying is some of those ballots could be fraudulently produced and not produced by the county clerks, that somebody else produced them?
Well, the ballots are in, but my question is, when they're counting those ballots, is there anything done more than just counting? I mean, is there an effort to look at the ballots and say, yeah, this is on the voter list, this name is correct, and the address is correct, things like that? Yes.
I think, Lisa, being a county clerk, has been the one that's probably out of all of us conducted the most recounts. And as part of that process, so take, for example, the recount that just happened in Dane and Milwaukee County. There's a county board of canvass, and they're charged with adjudicating any of those types of issues. So they look at things like the various artifacts of the election. They look at the absentee envelopes. They look at other artifacts of the election. And if there are questions about whether or not that ballot should have been counted, if everything was done correctly, they bring it to the board of canvassers, who is bipartisan and who makes determinations on whether or not that ballot should be counted. Now, like Kelly just said, we can't tie back that exact envelope to the exact ballot, right? Unless it was central count where there's a vote, there's no tie back between those two pieces of information. But the statutes provide what to do in that situation. It's called a drawdown. And basically it means that they have to randomly select from a pool of distinguished ballots, what ballots won't be counted as part of the official recount total. But Lisa, again, is probably more of the expert on this.
One of the other things we do during a recount is we go through the poll books and we're comparing those poll books to verify that the numbers match the number of ballots that are on that poll book. So that's another piece of that check and balance. We're reviewing all the inspector statements, again, all the envelopes, making sure everything matches. All of our numbers total, all that balancing is taken care of during a recount.
The follow-up question, we're looking at the elections committee, and Senator Bernier and Representative Branchen are doing a good job of looking at the issues that need to be resolved, because Justice Haggerty said they could not make decisions during the election, but we need to get things done before elections. Do you have any suggestions for us in terms of what needs to be changed? I know there are questions between what the clerks can do based on statutes and based on directives from the Elections Commission. Do you have any suggestions?
Appreciate the question, and I think we're going to follow up on that at a later date. So our focus really here is on training and helping people understand the process, what potentially could be new law down the line. I think we'll have more light on that subject when the Legislative Audit Bureau is done. And then, of course, my colleagues, I call them colleagues, county clerks and municipal clerks, will certainly weigh in once that information comes forward. So, I mean, good thought, good question, but this is an ongoing process. But today we want to focus on the process, where our checks and balances are located. If this happens, what do we know and when do we know it? If we have more ballots than people on poll books, we have a process to draw down. If we have an extraordinary number of more ballots than voters and there's no initials on them, we know where that came from. If there's initials on them, we got to figure out what the problem is. And it would be glaringly obvious to our municipal clerks and our poll workers should that happen. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Another quick question over here just came to mind here. Ms. Paulson, you're Rock County, correct?
Correct.
I'm looking at the list from Rock County that one address in Rock County generated 1,260 absentee ballots from your county alone. One address that it came from. Another community had 763 absentee ballots from one address. This is a problem with WEX books. Is what I was trying to get to before about independent auditing needing to be done. The depth of this goes much further than just a couple anecdotal information here. The other problem that I have is with the way the absentees were generated across the state and how many were sent out. Now, you mentioned that over ballots, Dane County has more than 9,000 ballots more than the electronic votes on their machine. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but there's more than 9,000 ballots that they have physically than they do electronic ballots that were provided.
Clerk Tollefson, would you be able to speculate as to how many voters there were at one residency?
So if it's an apartment building, it looks like they're all at the same residence. I'd have to find out what that address is to see.
Okay, so in good faith, we will follow up with you on that address and get you a logical explanation on that, as well as, I think I might go ahead and have Administrator Wolf talk about how we can have more ballots than electronic ballots. How did you describe that? Did you understand the question or the concern?
I didn't, but I would welcome, to review that data. I'm not familiar with what he's referencing. However, let me try to provide an example here if I think what you're asking. So voters can request and cancel up to 3 ballots. That's statutory. Another thing that's statutory. So let's say I vote and I change my mind, or I think I may have made a mistake. I can cancel my ballot and I can ask for another one to be issued to me. And I can do that up to 3 times. And so somebody can we can issue more ballots than end up actually being counted on election day. But again, that's part of that reconciliation process, because every single time a clerk sends out an absentee ballot or issues a ballot at the polls, they have to compare it against the other records. So if they already have a ballot back for somebody, they can't issue them another one until they first cancel that ballot. But that's, an example of how you could have more ballots issued than end up being counted on election day, because 9,000 ballots could have certainly been canceled, where somebody would either choose to cancel their ballot, maybe has become deceased or otherwise ineligible since they requested that ballot, or they may have chosen to cancel it and to cast a different one.
Does that include those who do not return? Because there's quite a few that don't return them.
Exactly. And there's also a lot of people that don't return their ballots. They may ask for a ballot and then not return it. And plus, if you ask for a ballot and you don't return it, if you don't return it, you're eligible to vote at the polls on election day. So when you go into the polling place, on the poll book, it's going to say this voter was issued an absentee ballot, not returned, but issued. And then the poll worker is going to say, did you return your ballot? And if the voter says, no, I decided I wanted to come to the polls instead, they're eligible to vote at the polls on election day. Now, if their ballot did come back, that's going to be caught as part of that process, and it's not going to be counted and added to the totals.
Okay, another question back here. And then we have to move on because we're running late.
I was just curious, if a seal is found to be broken on machine, would all the votes on that machine then be suspect?
Would do is then replace that equipment. All the ballots would need to be rerun.
Okay, we're going to move on because it's getting late. I don't have a date tonight, so I can stay as long as you want. But I have a feeling other people probably want to get out of here as close to 3 o'clock as possible, but we're willing to stay longer. So take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Wolashin. I'm a Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Election Systems and Software. We're one of the technology providers that support Wisconsin elections. We have a couple of devices in front of you that we're going to demonstrate here in a minute, but my comments are directed at some of the rhetoric that you've been hearing in the media about how can you trust election technology to work and work correctly every time. I just want to give you a little context about that before my coworker here talks about the machines specifically. I've been with ES&S, this is my 4th year. Before I joined ES&S, I was the Chief Security Officer at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., overseeing security for organizations like the Food and Drug Administration, National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control, and Indian Health Service, among others. Before that, I was the Deputy Security Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C., overseeing security for the Veterans Health Administration. And prior to that, a couple of private and public sector jobs and then almost 30 years in the United States Navy. I'm a retired naval officer, both service as an enlisted and an officer. All of my jobs, my entire career has been dedicated to information security, network security, and now product security. I maintain an active security clearance so that I can interface with our intelligence community, Homeland Security, the FBI, and others, so that we get direct insight into the threats that are being made against our elections infrastructure. I'm a full-time CISO. My sole job at ES&S is to worry about security for our employees, for our company, our network, and our products. We're the only major technology provider that has a full-time security officer, and we're proud of that. Nobody else has the resources to do what we do. You've heard a lot about testing and what this county and municipal election officials do in regards to testing. But there's a whole lot of testing that happens before these devices ever make it into the state. We are required to test these devices and the software that goes into them multiple times before they get into your hands. We have to run over 1 million ballots through these devices and have 0 errors in the vote counting before we even submit them to the federal test labs. We submit our equipment to 2 independent voting system test labs so that they test the operability, the accessibility, environmental concerns to make sure that these devices work as designed. They check our software and make sure that it is completely functional and that nothing else exists on these devices except for the software needed to count votes. We also have submitted voluntarily, we've submitted these devices to the Department of Homeland Security for in-depth security testing, for independent third-party security companies who we have submitted these devices to for security penetration testing. There's a whole lot of testing that goes on before it ever makes it to the state. And we're proud of that. You heard Megan and others that are referred to certification. These devices must be federally certified, that they perform as designed, nothing else, before the Election Assistance Commission gives them a certification. And then the state of Wisconsin does their own independent testing and certification to make sure that these devices are safe, secure, reliable, trustworthy. Our partnerships, I mentioned a couple of them. We work directly with the Department of Homeland Security, their critical product evaluation program, to make sure that our election technology is secure, reliable, and is void of any of the vulnerabilities that you've heard about in the press. We work with the FBI. We work with our U.S. intelligence community to understand the threats being targeted at the election infrastructure of our country. And we design controls to make sure that those threats cannot affect the equipment that is being used in Wisconsin today. We also partner with other manufacturers, other election technology providers who do business in Wisconsin and other states. We partner with them in the Election Infrastructure Subsector Coordinating Council. It's a group that was formed by Homeland Security that bring all these technology providers together to understand the threats to election infrastructure and make sure that we're following best practices that the federal government suggests and that others have suggested. And finally, the voluntary voting system guidelines. These are the standards that voting system manufacturers must adhere to when we design and build our election systems. We voluntarily submit our equipment for assessment of the voluntary voting system guidelines to make sure that they are secure and perform as designed. This is just a little bit of giving you a glimpse about what we're doing to focus on security. But the proof is in the pudding. I've observed elections all over the country. We have a footprint in 42 states, and I can tell you that the municipalities, the counties, and the state of Wisconsin is doing it right. Doing it right. Now, the best part of our presentation is demonstrating a couple of these devices that you see in front of you that are in use in Wisconsin counties. And for that, I'm going to turn it over.
I'll give you this, but I need it back.
Do you want this one, Kyle? Kyle, do you want this?
I can just go with this. Okay, I'm going to give a quick little rundown of the equipment. Just real quick, we're ES&S. We are in 31 counties in the state of Wisconsin. Over 800 municipalities use our equipment, and the vast majority of them use what we are showing here today. So that is the DS200 precinct optical scan machine and the Express Vote universal voting device, which I'll get to in a minute. So this is by and large, what's used in the state. In the 2020 presidential election, 2/3 of Wisconsin voters cast their ballot on ES&S equipment. That's something we're very proud of. So let's just kind of run through the process real quick though. I'm going to act like it's election day. But remember, before this, the county has done the programming, or we have done the programming. The sticks and the supplies have been given to the municipal clerks. Municipal clerks have loaded on the machine. They've done a pre-test. They've done a public test. They've locked and sealed in the USB media device, which holds all the information about the election. The machine has been securely stored and sealed, and all that is done to maintain the security environment before election day. So now it is election morning. This is early. This is usually 5:30, 6 a.m. Polls open at 7, so we got to be ready to roll. Poll workers come in, they plug in their machine, they boot it on. The very first screen that it comes to is a password screen. So even if somebody gets to the equipment, thinks they're going to do something, if they don't know this password, there's nothing they can do to this machine. It'll turn itself off. And that password is programmable and customizable per county, per election. We can set it to whatever we want. So I will enter the password for today. Now at this point, the machine will finish opening up that I've put in the correct password. And while this is going on, I will say all the files that are on the USB stick are encrypted and digitally signed. So we have to decrypt them and check them out before we're able to use them. So that gets done, and then it prints a configuration report. So this is the first report. This is just a nice printout of all the settings, firmware, components, anything that has to do with this machine and this election. We get a nice printout of that. So if at any point in the future, we want to know, hey, well, how were we set up for that election 3 years ago? We have a printed record of that we can go back to and verify. So this isn't very, useful information. Poll workers don't really know what it means. It doesn't have a big place, but it's just nice to have that printed copy of what was going on at that time. And that's done. It comes up, it says this voting device is ready to be opened. It has a check mark election definition found. So that means that there's a valid USB stick inserted in the machine. It gives us the name of the election so that we know we're using the right election. Every once in a while, a stick doesn't get reburned and may have still have the previous election on it. And it also gives the name of the polling place. So it'll say usually the municipality, maybe the ward number. So you've got the right stick for the right place, the right election. It also says you're plugged into electricity. We want to make sure we've got power first thing in the morning. The machines do have battery backup in them, but it's better just to run it on power. When you've got the power, we don't want to start it out on battery. If everything's good, they just hit the green open poll button. And now at this point is when it will print the zero report, which Kelly talked about earlier. We want a record. We want to show every contest, every candidate had 0 votes to start the day. Obviously, we don't want anybody to have anything. If we do see that, if that ever happens, what happens is test data was not cleared, but the machine will warn you of that and you get that cleared off before you start your voting. So it's printing out my zero tape. It's got a list of all the contests and all the candidates. And they all say 0. And then at the very end, it will have a kind of an affidavit language about we, the undersigned, do hereby certify, and signature lines. Poll workers must sign this tape that say, yes, I checked this tape. This was 0 to start the morning. We are good to go. The tape, some places keep it connected to the machine. Some places put it away to keep it for safety reasons. Now we say go to vote mode. This is the screen that the machine's on all day for the voters. It gives a nice animation of what the voter needs to do. Walk up, put their ballot in the machine. Here's a ballot. The voter checks in at the poll worker table. They check them in the poll book. They make sure they're someone who should be voting. And then they're given a ballot and they go over to the voting booth. They make their selections by filling in the oval next to the candidates they would like to choose. They make all their selections. They walk up to the voting machine. You can put the ballot in any orientation. It'll take it either way. It scans the ballot, takes a count based on that scan and says, thank you for voting. Your ballot has been counted, ready for the next voter. So just that fast, we've counted it and we've saved it and we're ready for the next voter. All new equipment is actually taking an image of the ballot as it's scanning it. So when elections are equipment, there is a record of every single ballot that was cast in that county. We have a permanent electronic record of that to go along with the paper record. What I have here is a test deck like we talked about earlier. This is a very basic one. We typically do a 1-2 pattern. So if you're doing your testing pre-election time, run these ballots through. When you get to the end, you should have a nice 1-2, 1-2 pattern. We're big believers in patterns because it makes it really easy to spot inconsistencies. You can do a random test deck if you want, but then you've got it added up by hand and then check it number by number. If you do a pattern test deck, anybody can look at it and it should say 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, and you know you're right. If you see anything other than 1-2s, you got something wrong. Let me finish putting these ballots in. So this one is a overvote, which we always include the 1-2 pattern as well as an overvote and a blank in our test decks. So we just want to check to make sure the machine is catching that. It says you filled in too many ovals in 5 contests. These votes will not count. We changed all of our messaging a few years ago on the machines to be plain language, plain English. It used to say overvote. We know most voters may not know what an overvote is. So now we say you just flat out filled in too many ovals. That's understandable. And then we say in the contest for favorite dog, you chose 2 candidates, you were allowed 1. And then it goes right down the list. So it tells them where they made a mistake, what their mistake was. It does not show who they voted for. We do not want to show that on the screen. We want to keep that private between the voter and we don't want anybody else walking up and seeing who they voted for. So we tell them where their mistakes are, but we don't say who they voted for. At this point, the voter has an option to return the ballot and fix it or cast it as is. Now, if I'm up here running a test deck as a municipal clerk, I'm just going to cast it because I know there's an open vote in every single style. That's part. And then the last one, similarly, is going to be a blank. So we always test a blank where every contest was skipped. The machine comes up, says blank ballot. You made no selections on this ballot. To correct your ballot, press return. To cast your ballot without any selections, press cast blank ballot. So the voter would have the option. Now me, once again, if I'm running a test deck, I know I've included a blank. I'm just going to say cast. And then lastly, we also like to include in our test decks an express vote card. We recommend this. You should have 1 express vote card because we need to test that. Anything that's going to be used or done on election day, we want to test. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can add an extra card to your test deck. I don't like that way. That can mess up your 1-2 pattern. So instead, what I do is a replacement. I pull out one of my paper test ballots and I'll mark it on the express vote instead and put it in. And that way it maintains my 1-2, 1-2 pattern. Okay, so that's the DS200. Move over to the express vote real quick. So the idea here is, so as part of the HAVA, every polling place in the United States must have an ADA compliant voting machine. So it's got audio capabilities, it's got a Braille keypad, it's got other ADA input devices like a sip and puff or a rocker paddle. A machine that has this functionality is required to be in every polling place in the United States. That being said, we've kind of taken it one step further with the express vote. And we call it a universal voting device because we think it's good for all voters. Voters can make mistakes filling out ovals. I know it's hard to believe, but they do. Some people don't fill in ovals completely. Some fill in too many ovals. Some fill in not enough and don't realize it. You know, if it's a vote for 2 race, that sneaks up on people. They're so used to voting for 1, they forget that there's multiple there. So all these situations, they will not happen on the express vote. Let me run through a real quick voting session. So it's activated off this express vote card. If there is only one ballot style in the polling place, it'll just pull that ballot style up for the voter and they can start voting. If it's a polling place that has multiple ballot styles, say multiple school districts, maybe a congressional split, anything, it will list the different styles and what they are. And we want the poll worker to choose the style for the voter. We do not want voters choosing their own style. They could choose the wrong one, and that means they're voting on the wrong contest. So poll workers, just like they hand out the right paper ballot, they will choose the right ballot to give the voter on the express vote. This one is it's a single style, so it pulled right up. It gives the contest name at the top, favorite dog breed, the vote for, which is vote for one, and then the choices. To make a selection, the voter touches anywhere along the box, and then a green check mark shows up. They can hit next because you flip through it like pages on a book. Once you're off the first page, you can hit previous to go back if you'd like. If a voter changes their mind, if they make one selection and then change their mind, if it's a vote for one, it will automatically flip for them. So that's pretty easy to do. If it's a multi-vote for, this one's a vote for two, and they try to choose a third one, it's going to stop them and say, hey, you've already made the maximum number of selections. I need you to go back and deselect one of those because we don't know which one of the two you've picked to get rid of. We want the voter to tell us that. We're not going to guess at which one they want to get rid of. So if I go back, I deselect a choice, and then I make a choice. There is a zoom feature on the express vote, so it blows the text up. That's actually one of the more popular features. You know, voters show up, they forget their glasses at home. If you put them on the express vote and then hit the zoom button, they say, oh yeah, I can see this easily, whereas they may not be able to read the paper ballot. The type's too small. There's also a high contrast function, so that's white on black. That's good for people with certain vision issues. So you have to view every contest. You can't skip ahead, and then you must review all your selections. So I've made all my choices, and now the machine is telling me what my selections were. So it goes right down the line. If you voted for the maximum number, it gives you a green check mark. This is good, everything's good here. If you skipped a race or you didn't vote for the maximum number, you'll get an orange circle with an exclamation point in it. And that's where you kind of want to warn the voter, hey, you didn't quite vote for the maximum number here. That's okay. It's perfectly acceptable. You can skip races if you want, but we at least want to warn you. If a voter sees that and they want to correct it, they could hit previous, and flip back, but that can be tough to do if it's a long ballot. So otherwise, they can touch right on the name of that contest. It'll bring them back to it. They can make their selection, hit next. It goes right back to the review screen, and it highlights the change that was made. Now the voter sees all their selections here. They hit next. They get to the end, and it says it's going to print the card now, and I will do that. The printer in here is a thermal printer, which we like because it means there's no toner cartridges, no ink. There's nothing to mess with. It's all done by heat. And then a printed card comes out. So this is now my printed card. At the top, there's some information about the election, the name, the date, the county, the ballot style that was chosen. Then there are some barcodes, which is what the tabulators will read, which tie back to the old positions on the paper ballot. And then it lists every contest and candidate that voter selected. It's printed right here in plain English on that card. The voter looks at it and they say, yes, this is how I intend to vote. Then they come over to the DS200 and get their ballot tabulated. It takes a picture like that of that ballot, just like it does the paper ballot. Saves all those images. Okay, so let's fast forward. It is now 8 o'clock at night, 13 hours later. Polls are closed. If any voters in line, they get to vote even if it's past 8, but all voters who are in line have voted. I'm a poll worker, I'm ready to close the polls. So I take out my key, I need to unlock the door. This is also would be sealed in an election. So I would check my seal number against my inspector statement, break the seal, open the door, and there's a simple close polls button in here, and I just press that. At this point, and Kelly alluded to this, there is no running totals being kept on the machine. There is only the individual vote records. When I hit close polls here, this is when it actually totals up the results. So the results don't even exist as a total aggregate. They are individual results until the end of the night. So once it's done totaling up the results, then it automatically prints the results tape. So this is just like the zero tape, but instead of being zeros, now it lists all the totals for every contest and candidate that was on the ballot. We can also pre-program how many of these tapes print. We do always at least 2 in Wisconsin because the county clerk needs a copy and the municipal clerk needs a copy. If it's a school election, we typically will do 3 because the school district gets a copy as well. So these will just come out automatically. Get to the end, you get signature lines again, signed by the election inspectors. And now if this were set up as a modem election, which this one isn't, you would come to a modem screen and there's a one-touch button where you say begin modem process. And only at that point is the modem even activated. The modem is not active, it's not usable, it's not doing anything until after the polls have been closed and this tape has been printed. Then the modem is activated, makes a quick call into the county. It checks itself out and drops off the results and then turns itself off. Okay, but this one is ready to go. There's a couple other options. If the poll workers needed more tapes, they could print more. That's an option. But if everything's good, they hit the finish turn off button. It turns the machine off. They can pack up all their other supplies, do all their other paperwork, and then head home for the evening. That's kind of it.
Thank you, Kyle. Everything that we just talked about, we have brought on informational one sheets that we're happy to give you to take home and study. If you want to ask questions, the best source of information is your municipal or county clerk. But we have these information sheets here for you if you'd like to pick them up after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I always, I've been, reason why we're having this is because so many people ask me so many questions about the electoral process. And so during the day, would I be able to hack into your electronic voting system without breaking the seals or doing it directly to the machine?
Absolutely not. This device is not connected to the outside, especially the non-modem versions. There's nothing in there that communicates with the internet or cellular or Wi-Fi. There's no hardware and there's no software in that device. Now, for the few units in use in Wisconsin that have modems in it, you just heard Kyle say that that modem doesn't become active until after the poll has closed. It is not working. It is not communicating during the day. It's not turned on until after the polls close and you push that button. And even then, if you were to try and intercept that transmission, it is being passed to the county office through a private network, not the internet, a private circuit set up by Verizon for us to allow these devices in the field to communicate with the county network. It is not detectable, nor is it addressable on the public internet. So the long answer to your short question is no.
So can that machine receive information or can it only send out information?
It can only send out information. It's programmed to do one thing, the ones that have modems in that. After the poll has closed, is to bundle the unofficial results, to encrypt them using 256-bit encryption, to digitally sign them, and then to send them to one IP address at the receiving end in the county office.
Okay, so I've been familiar. I served on the board of advisors for the United States Election Assistance Commission, as well as Megan has. And one of the requirements since 2000 election, I always call it the Florida 2000 debacle, and the Help America Vote Act in 2005 was to have some standardization in all of our processes and for the EAC to do inspections and or certifications of electronic voting. And so, I won't put you on the spot because you're a specific company, but all of the companies who provide information and equipment to be certified through the EAC and or our state government has to follow certain standards. All of them do, not just the ES&S. Is that a fair statement?
There are registered manufacturers who work with the EAC. We are one of them. I think there are more than a dozen registered manufacturers. We follow the EAC guidelines because we are a registered manufacturer.
Okay, so in all of this election stuff and things that people think they know, I always refer back to, okay, let's just say that somebody somehow changed some information in that machine, and the information that the electors put in through their ballot somehow changed. Would that be detectable at any point in time?
Absolutely. You've heard about the thorough pre-election testing that happens at the county or municipal level before an election. The test deck is passed through there to make sure that the results are what they're expected to be. If somebody were to manipulate or attempt to manipulate that machine to steer votes from candidate B to candidate A, that would show up in the test deck results. And immediately the municipal election official would notice my test deck is not matching the expected results. They'd take that machine offline and replace it with a good one. And then probably call us to say what happened and have us figure it out.
Okay, so is it fair to say that that machine doesn't know anything until I put in a memory stick? I tell it what to do by that software that I provided. It doesn't know anything outside of what I've given it.
That's not just fair to say, that's exactly what happens. That machine is a dumb terminal until it receives that secure encrypted programming stick from the county or municipality.
Okay, so I set it all up for you to ask questions that I may have forgotten. Any other questions here? Over there? Okay.
Said that this machine would notify you if you did not vote a specific contest or if it was blank, that like in your test deck. Does it also notify the voter if they have not completely voted their ballot?
It's possible to do that. That's a programmable option. It's typically not done though, because voters skip races all the time. And if you start warning every voter every time they skip a race, it can cause more confusion than anything in the polling place.
But that one will.
That one will warn you, yes.
Okay. So there's a
'cause
difference if you filled it out as a paper ballot and skipped a race and they were skipped a specific contest and
Yeah.
then it wouldn't notify you. But if you did that one, it would automatically at all times tell
Yep.
you that you
That one,
skipped
because it's walking you through contest by contest, you're going to get those kinds of warnings. It's a more full feature voting experience. Like I said, it's an option. All the county clerks get to pick it. But most of them don't, because it actually.
Thank you. Since I left my glasses up there, I'm going to have Michael ask this question because we've gotten this frequently lately.
Will any updates to the system or anything that what might be done with software updates or computer updates jeopardize any of the data? Is that all going to be retained?
It's all going to be retained. The standard procedure is that the device, the election management system, is completely backed up. A copy of that database from previous elections are stored before a update or an enhancement is applied to the device.
And just two really quick points, and I'd like to see if the rest of the team might want to weigh in too. One is that the paper ballot is always the official artifact of the election. So even if, let's say, somebody did tamper with the programming, highly unlikely, but if it happened, it wouldn't change that paper ballot. And as we're going to talk about next, there are a lot of robust post-election processes where we actually look at the paper ballots and make sure that they are the same as what was reported by these machines. And so we'll talk about that next, but I think that's a really important paper ballot. That is the official total, the official artifact of the election. And so even if something were wrong with the machine, it's not going to change the fact that the paper ballot is what we would go back to if there were ever any sort of question. Now, in terms of the actual machines themselves, and what happens when new software is available, I think it was said well that software has to be updated, right? And every time a software system is offered for update, clerks get to decide, do I need an update, right? Do I need a newer system than the one I have now? Before a clerk can buy that system, it has to go through federal certification and through state certification. Tomorrow, as a matter of fact, the commission is considering a new version of software and whether or not it should be certified in the state of Wisconsin. When a clerk buys new software, that doesn't mean all the machines in the state are being wiped and put a new version of software on. That doesn't mean that the information that was stored as part of an election is no longer maintained. It just means that some of the foundational components of the software are eligible for an update. And the commission has to review that, test that, review the federal reports, the independent testing labs before they're able to make that determination. But I don't know if Rob, our technology director, or Richard have anything to add.
I don't think I can add anything to that, Megan. Speaking as a technology director, I'd say we have a tendency to focus on the technological threats and sometimes forget the fact that Wisconsin's election system is founded on paper ballots and paper records, and that every single vote in Wisconsin is still available on a paper record.
And the same is true of registrations. All of those registration records are maintained with our local clerks. And so anytime if there's a question about an election, there's always the paper, the official paper to go back to verify.
Okay, I think we'll move on. And we're going to be later than 3 o'clock, so I hope y'all stick with us. We are going to go into post-election activity.
So post-election activities happen the day after election day, when my office is full of election records and results. And we're just going through, making sure everything is in order and transmitting the original copies to the county clerk or and school district clerk when they are on the ballot. That then kicks off the 30 days in which we have to do data entry of participation, right? So then voters start calling us and saying, I'm on my vote and I don't see that my vote was recorded. But you know, we're going to go through the 20,000 people that came through and voted, and we're going to do data entry that indicates that you voted on that day, not who you voted for, but that you voted. And so that then becomes part of your record of voting. We also then enter the election day registrations into the system, and those are probably a little bit more difficult because of handwriting. So a lot of times when we enter that, the checks are made the following day or the following days with the DMV records. A lot of times there's a data entry error where, you know, an A looks like an O, or you know, this type of situation, and we'll get alerted from the DMV that the record doesn't match. We have to go back into that document and try to figure out why. We do election reconciliation of the data. So in the WisVote system, we enter the data that the poll workers told us on their inspector's statements. So they tell us there's this many voters and this many ballots that all gets entered in. They tell us how many registrations we have. And then we start entering that into the system. It does there's any numbers that don't match, the clerk is notified as to that mismatch, and we have to go balance. Just like you balance your checkbook, we balance elections. We make sure that all of our equipment that's come back from the polls are in good order, and we secure them at a secure location in cities so that no one has access to that equipment for the next election. We also organize our records because we have what clerks like to call the audit lottery. That's where the state then goes through and does a random draw to make sure that at least one municipality in each county and a number of wards are drawn, right? So we don't know which one of our wards are going to be drawn in the lottery for an audit, but we wait anxiously to find out if we, and we're notified by the state that this is going to happen, and we prepare then for that coming audit. We also make response to a lot of public requests for election results and election records in the days and weeks following an election. So we do get a lot of open record requests and requests for information. We try to put information as we get our certifications done out on our website so that, the public has the information. We also then, after our canvas, we issue certifications to our winning municipal candidates, and we schedule them for their inauguration and their orientation. So this is an example of voter participation that's updated in the statewide voter registration system. And you see that barcode to the left of the voter's name? That can be scanned in with a barcode reader to automate the process and show that that voter voted. It also can scan in the absentee one. In the system, it does keep track of whether you are you voted at the poll site or you voted absentee. But we go through and we scan in each of those, and of course, we want to balance to the correct numbers. So if for some reason someone was scanned in as a poll site vote instead of an absentee, our numbers would be off, and then we would have to go and find that vote and flip it to the correct data.
And all that data is actually, our entire system is linked. So there's a statewide comparison in every election of all the people who voted. It's not just our county, like other states may have that set up. Our state is the entire state is compared.
I'm going to stop you, Clerk Tollefson, if you don't mind. So in regard to Representative Branchen's comment, I think we're kind of here at that point where the checks and balances are at, and the DMV information, state vital records information, and corrections all have information that is involved in those checks on individuals who have registered to vote. And I think this is where Clerk Michaels pointed out that they get the information, they determine who voted. I used to call it binking. We used to bink the participant, and then that information now goes through that system, and then that's where we get the whistles and the red lights to say there's a problem here. Is that a fair,
Correct.
accurate?
We're given registration list alerts, and that's all part of that checks afterward, in which we would then take a second look at the information that we've entered to make sure we've entered it correctly. Take a second look at, was that a valid vote? I mean, if we exhaust that look and we determine that maybe it is an irregularity, then that's where the documents that we have would be provided to the county district attorney for further investigation and possible charging.
And on election day, there is an ineligible list, right? So registration list alerts are sent to the clerk every day pretty much for some items, where they're able to take people off the list and activate them if they're no longer eligible. But poll books are printed in the days before the election. So that means that we continue to collect that information about who's no longer eligible, who has since become deceased or since become a felon. And that list is provided along with the poll book to each polling place. And they check that ineligible list before they register somebody to vote as well. So the list maintenance doesn't stop when the poll books are printed. Right up to election day, we're still getting real-time information about that type of stuff.
So at the county level, we, after the election, the next day, they're bringing in all the supplies. We're doing a verification off of their inspector statements, verifying the tags that are on their bags, those seals for their ballots match what they have listed. We're making sure we have all the documentation so that we can do our board of canvas. I always talk about the election day, the day after the election, everybody has election brain fog because we're so tired because we've worked probably 18 hours roughly. But what we're also looking at is making sure, like I said, we have everything that we need for that board of canvas. So the clerks may have to wait for some of that provisional ballot information to come in on Friday. They have, if someone has a provisional ballot, again, they have till 4 o'clock on Friday to provide that to their municipal clerk. they'll have to meet again to add those ballots into their totals and get that to us. Our county also has this lovely random audit. It's optional for counties. Our county started doing it 3 years ago. We do random audits at our canvas to verify our machine accuracy, just as another check and balance in our system. And we invite, during our public board of canvas, we usually do those on Mondays in my county. And we do them on Mondays because our school districts do theirs on Tuesdays. And if there's any questions, we've already looked at it before they get to it. We have, our board of canvas is made up of our one Republican, one Democrat, and myself. And we review everything. We review all of the inspector statements. So all those notations of what happened today, we read all of them. And my clerks try to make sure they have at least something on there when I train them. I say, there's got to be something that happened on election day, even if potluck was awesome. Write it on your inspector statement. So we know that you didn't forget to do something. We look at all of the tapes, all those tapes that come out of the machines, all their notes to make sure everything is complete. So we have a great idea of what happened on election day, and we can go back and find anything if we have a question. Once we certify that, we have a certification summary, and we check everything. In November, we started at 9 o'clock in the morning. We're going through everything. It took us till 7 o'clock that night to review every single tape and inspector statement in November. And then we had to go back and do some more work after that, so for some write-ins that we had to add in. But that is signed by our board of canvassers. That's a picture of our board of canvass from November. We actually used our jury assembly room at that time to give all of our spacing. We email that to the election commission, and then we send a hard copy to them. So nothing can be changed during that. And they're going to verify off of our hard copy that we mail to them directly. We do keep all of our canvas documents for 10 years. Our election documents for federal elections are kept for 22 months. And after that, part of my job as the county clerk is we have reliers. So we're also doing a lot of that work, entering that voter participation and reconciliation also for our municipalities that do not have the options or the ability to do it themselves. And it continues on. We are constantly checking things, verifying, reconciling to make sure our elections are open, transparent, and everything's checked.
All right, so during the post-election process on the state level, we have several responsibilities that we wanted to cover today. First, the elections commissioner of the state is required to certify results for state and federal contests. So 14 days after the election, every county should have canvassed the results and submitted them to our offices. And as Cliff Tolson said already, we're going to review those electronic records as they come in, because each county is required to submit an electronic record of their canvas through our canvas reporting system. And then so we review those on a rolling basis when they come in, and we validate the data that comes in for a variety of different reasons. First thing we do is we check all election results on a ward by ward basis against the registered voter rolls in our system. So if a ward or reporting unit has more votes than there are voters, we're going to flag that, and we're going to follow up with the county to figure out what went on here. There's a number transposed. You can see how this could easily happen. If you're supposed to have 1,400 voters in a reporting unit or a ward, and you flip the 4 and the 1, and suddenly you have 4,100 voters, we're going to catch that through our validation process, and we're going to follow up with the county and see what went on there. Same thing is going to happen if we see vote totals that are grossly under what the expected turnout was in a particular ward. If we see 0 or very few vote totals in that ward, we'll circle back to the county. There are always anomalies. There are wards across the state that historically turn out very, very well, other wards that underperform. And that's part of the process. That's part of voter behavior. But we also flag those, and we review those results with the counties to make sure that any issues are addressed before we certify. Because as Administrator Wolf talked about earlier, there are 3 levels of this check that goes on the different levels of government. The state level is the final level for those state and federal contests. So we review those results before certification, before
results are certified by the state during a public meeting. And any issues have to be addressed prior to that certification happening. As Clerk Michaels talked about, we do data validation and reconciliation in this vote. She do in there, but I will say that our staff facilitates this process, helps walk our clerks through this, follows up with any clerks who may be delayed in reconciling in our system, so that we can make sure that we have good, solid data that all reconciles before moving on. Any discrepancies are noted, and we walk through the process of resolving those, trying to untangle those mysteries. We also work with these clerks. If any fraud is detected, they're required to report that to the district attorney and then report that to our office. So all those things happen during the post-election process. Also, statutorily, we're required to file several different reports related to election integrity with the legislature. The first one is our election day registration postcard report. So anyone who registers on election day in Wisconsin, they do receive a postcard that's mailed to them, and it serves as an address verification that voter actually resides at the address where they registered at. So if that card is returned as undeliverable, that card gets sent back to the clerk. They would inactivate that voter record in the system, and they would refer that voter to the district attorney for investigation and potential prosecution for voter registration fraud. We're required to provide a summary of all those reports to the legislature, and we have all those reports available for public consumption on our website as well. In addition, we have an election fraud report. Each year, we're required to report to the legislature any incidents of election fraud or voter fraud that have been reported in our office. So we do provide that report to the legislature, and that's also a publicly available document. One of the things that have been talked about a little bit today, but we're going to go talk about a little bit more in depth, is the post-election audit. So state statute requires the Elections Commission to verify the performance of voting equipment that's used to conduct each general election. So this is a performance audit, and it's not a results confirming audit. So the audit isn't designed to say who won each individual contest. It is designed to determine whether or not the voting equipment that was certified for use in conducting the election performed up to its certification standards. So the audit is conducted by hand counting all ballots in the selected reporting units or wards, and comparing those totals to the voting machine results tapes that were generated on election night and that were used as part of the canvass process. The selection, it takes place at random on the day following the election during a public meeting. And then our clerks are notified if they're lucky enough, as Clerk Michael said, to win the lottery. In this case, statute does require the audit, but it does not set the parameters for what that audit should look like. So our commission does set those parameters. So this process has evolved over time, and the 2020 audit was conducted using the following specifications. So 5% of all reporting units across the state were randomly selected. At least 5 of each type of machine that records and tabulates votes were included in the audit. At least 1 reporting unit from each county was included in that sample size. And all audits had to be completed by the time the commission certified their results after the 2020 general election. And then we report the results of the audit to the commission as part of a public meeting. And that report is also publicly posted and available on our website. In all, close to 200,000 ballots were hand counted as part of the audit process as a check on all of the equipment. And there may be a question that comes up, so we'll address this head on. Has the audit ever identified any problems? And the short answer is yes, it has. We actually found an issue during this last audit, a specific type of voting equipment, ballots that had creases through an oval as good votes. And in that case, the audit identified that problem, and we were able to amend the certification of that system so that that problem would no longer be an issue moving forward. So it has served as a very valuable tool to A, make sure that our voting equipment is performing up to certification standards, and B, to catch any issues that have come up during an election and address those moving forward so that those problems don't exist in future elections. So that's the state role in election process.
Just really briefly, there's a couple of things that are sort of list maintenance, but can't happen until after an election. And I think sometimes these things get conflated. So we talked about the things the clerks do to make sure the poll book is good before election day. But then what do we do after election day? Take a look at the rolls, make sure somebody didn't vote twice. One of the tools we use for that post-election process is ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. What this is a consortium of states that shares data. So we share data, and after a general election, right, because that's the only election where we're all voting on the same day, we share voter participation data and look for people that may have voted twice. Did somebody vote in Wisconsin and in another state? We're able to investigate that, and the commission makes referrals to the district attorney and refers those people for criminal prosecution. And that's part of what's also reported to the legislature. Eric also sends us data looking in state. So like the clerk said, our statewide system, we can see from a statewide vantage point all of the voter participation statistics for every election. And after each election, we all go in and take a look and try to determine if somebody voted twice in 2 different municipalities. Eric does that too for Wisconsin and for lists across the country, where we're looking at Wisconsin to determine, did somebody vote twice? Did somebody vote that was deceased? And if we find those instances, and sometimes we do, it's a small amount, but sometimes we do, those are referred for criminal prosecution. So that's something that happens after election day. We'll take another look at the voter participation data, and there are actually referrals made if there is any crime that's been committed. Another thing that we do after election day, and I think that this one again gets conflated a lot. So the statutes prescribe a process called 4-year maintenance. It's a little confusing because 4-year maintenance happens every 2 years. So every 2 years after a general election, we take a look at the voter rolls and we say, who has not voted in the last 4 years? So every other November, we take a look and we say, who has not voted in the last 4 years? If somebody has not voted in 4 years, they're sent a postcard that says, you haven't voted in 4 years. Do you still live at that address? Do you want to stay on the rolls at that address? If the clerk receives their postcard as undeliverable, do not hear back from the voter, which is the majority of people. It was about 200,000 people this last time around. Clerk does not hear from them, or if they get an undeliverable, they're inactivated. So they're turned to inactive in the system, which means that they will not be on the poll. But the voter also has the opportunity to send back their postcard to the clerk and say, hey, I still live here. Yeah, I just haven't voted in 4 years, but I still live here. And then they're left in active status, but they have to get that confirmation. That cannot happen by state law until after a general election. So I think there's been some misinformation about, well, that should have happened before the election. It can't. That's not possible. It has to happen by state law after the general election. We're looking at the rolls to see who has not voted in 4 years. And that's one of the few things that the statute gives the Elections Commission the authority to help make some of those deactivations. The rest of the list maintenance happens at the municipal level.
Okay, well, I think we did a bang up job in 2 hours and 15 minutes. If Kelly and Lisa, if I, as an elector, had a question about, as a gentleman who is not with us right now, but had a question about, I see 1,000 voters all registered at the same address. Do you see that there's the same address for multiple voters? Does that come up as an issue in your system, or would it?
Don't have, if you're talking about a registration list alert, we could certainly run a report. However, I think Clerk Tollefson was correct. If you have a large apartment complex or a large facility, obviously you're going to get a common address. But I think more likely the situation was like what Megan explained as far as issuance, multiple requests. And 2020 was a very difficult year for elections. We've never done elections in a pandemic, and we had a lot of requests for absentee, people worried about getting their ballots, people worried about the postal not delivering them. So I think there were more requests or issuance or worry that they, their ballot didn't arrive in time. And I think that upped the issuance totals, generally speaking. But as she had mentioned, they get checked in when we receive them back and allow more. So
the same address in an apartment complex would have apartment numbers, I'm guessing. So that's not a really good answer.
Well, it is in a different field, right? And so, again, I encourage someone like that gentleman to submit information to us. We'll take a look. We'll take a look at that data. We'll find out. We'll take a look at that publicly available information, and we'll see what's going on here. And that's my guess, is that it is an apartment. Those are different columns, right? I won't bore you all. You've been here a long time with addressing.
Okay, there's another column to look at.
Addressing is really important in elections. And, sometimes ward and district boundaries, they run through an apartment. And so that apartment number is an important part of that information. But to make accurate comparisons with the DMV and other agencies we work with, you have to separate those out into different columns. And so sometimes the main street address is all going to be in one column together, and the apartments will be in that apartment field.
And of course, we have assisted living and elderly living facilities that would also have a similar issue. Anyone else pondering these really deep thoughts as I am? Any questions? Over here. Can't let you go yet.
Does the Elections Commission or county or munis conduct any sort of historical analysis to identify any statistical anomalies? For example, let's say I live in a city or a town that you have 100 vote people who every presidential election is around 100 to 200 voters, but then at one election or statewide election, you see 500 voters. Would there be something that the commission or locals would conduct every cycle to catch that?
That's a great question. And no, statute doesn't provide for that type of specific check that you just mentioned. There's not a historical comparison. But what I will say is that's a real strength of our decentralized system. So again, Wisconsin operates at the municipal level versus the county level, which means you've got 1,850 watchdogs on their community. And over 1,200 of those are townships, right? And so what that means is those clerks are registering voters. And if they saw an unusual number of registrations come across, they would certainly flag that and follow up on that, because most of them have a very deep connection with their community. And so I think the answer to that is each clerk is the custodians of registering voters, of issuing absentees, and they're going to make a determination if something's unusual. They're not.
So just to clarify, there's no statutory preventing you from doing that either, correct?
I think that's accurate, yeah.
And I would say that for historical information, clerks do run historical information, right? Because we have to have a crystal ball to understand, how many ballots am I going to need, or how much resources am I going to need to put into this election? So we do that, but there are other factors that play into that decision, not just historical. It would be like, you start seeing during in-person absentee and increased local interest in a race. Maybe you're getting more requests for absentees. So before election day, there are all of these little cues that we get to say, ooh, this is going to be bigger than what I thought. I better order some more ballots, and that type of thing. But the historical information is used to make good predictions as to where we're going as far as turnout.
And there is a statutory requirement for us to submit what's called the 190 reports, which is election statistics. And so if you go on our website, it tells with the legislature, you're going to see all those statistical reports that are available for, so those election statistic reports are available on our website, and folks certainly take a look at that, do the type of analysis that you're about. And compare that with census data and whatnot, but that is not a function of our agency.
So at the county level, I keep track of what's happening in my communities. Like, for example, if there's an ATV referendum on the ballot, I'm ordering more ballots for that municipality. If there's something contested in a school board race, I'm going to order more ballots. If marijuana is on the ballot, I'm going to order more ballots. Those things take, all of those things pop, and we take that into consideration when we're ordering. So we're looking at the history and what's on those ballots when we're ordering, and we have a good idea what's coming in on election night.
Well, I have to say, in defense of the county clerks, you don't just take it in under your purview to go ahead and order more ballots. It really legally is the responsibility of the municipal clerk to tell us how many ballots they need. And as an experienced county clerk, I had a municipality that had some big stuff going on at the local level. Ordered ballots. The county clerk usually looks back historically. Our town clerks want us to make the decisions for them. So I get that. But I didn't know about this excitement going on in the town of Tilden. And they ran out of ballots, and then it was all my fault. So that ended up in court, and they told the judge it was all my fault. And the lawyer for the town didn't even know. So these questions we have about process in running an election. And I knew when I won by 87 votes on election night and 93 votes after the recount, as a county clerk, I had honestly 100% confidence that assembly seat was not going to change, because I was that confident in the processes that we have set up in especially since 2005 with the statewide voter registration. We didn't have that prior. You could walk into a town and say, my name's Kathy Bernier, I'm here to vote, and I live on 123 Main Street. And they'd write it down in a blank paper book and hand you a ballot. You want to talk about how secure our system is now compared to 2000, 2001, 2002, right up through Help America Vote Act and statewide voter registration, which I won't go into the nightmare of how I made that all work. But the fact of the matter is nothing is perfect. I don't think we're going to go to the purple ink and sticking our finger in the ink pad. We have a great system overall. Is it perfect? No, I don't think you will find a perfect system, because we have very imperfect people and we are human beings. So with that said, I hope you learned a lot about our system, where the checks and balances are. If there's ever any questions by anyone, feel free to contact these folks who are on the ground doing the job and do their level best. Like I said, all human beings, we all make mistakes, and we all don't always do the right thing. But overall, having done recounts, having been in a recount, knowing full well we've had 2 statewide recounts, one in the Justice for Justice Prosser, and one when President Trump was on the ballot for the presidential. And they came out accurate. I'm sorry, but there is not a reason to spread misinformation about this past election when we have all the evidence that shows otherwise. So thank you for attending. Have a wonderful day.